sir.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming. We're going to talk about big tech, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, and what we need to do to end their gatekeeping power over information and commerce. And this started under the Trump 45 administration, where we saw our 100-year-old antitrust laws get dusted off, and we ended big tech's antitrust amnesty, where we want to use antitrust, which is law enforcement, to go after these trillion-dollar big tech monopolists who they have too much power, and they use that power for bad things, and they're anti-competitive. And we saw that the Trump 45 Justice Department started this. I always said that the only thing that the Biden administration did right was they continued President Trump's antitrust enforcement under the Biden antitrust division. And we're seeing with President Trump that he is fully committed to finishing the job with antitrust. You see this with his appointment of Andrew Ferguson to chair the Federal Trade Commission. And we're seeing this with President Trump's pick of Gail Slater to lead the antitrust division. And it's critically important because these trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, they crush competition, they shutter small businesses, and they cancel conservatives and others with whom they disagree. And I'll tell you, the tip of the spear in this fight has been Senator Schmitt from Missouri. He has been a warrior against big tech. And so I'm very pleased to talk to him today about these issues. And I just want to start this off, Senator, to just get your thoughts on antitrust and big tech generally and what you think needs to happen.
Well, I think great to be with you and great to be back at CPAC. What a great crowd. This feels a lot different now that we won in November than it did just a couple years ago, doesn't it? There's a new sheriff in town. So, yeah, I think that for most people, especially people in this room and conservatives, they have seen, Mike, over the last 4 years in particular, what happens when you have these massive concentrations of power. And you see that sort of collide with this fundamental belief that we have as conservatives that when we're born with certain rights. And those rights come from God. And the first one that's mentioned in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, is the right to speak your mind. This idea of fundamental human expression, right? And government's only role is to make sure it protects those rights. That's like the foundation of the country, and we believe that. So when you have these massive companies then that infringe upon that right, and sometimes at the behest of the federal government, it's a scary situation. In my previous job, before this one, I was Attorney General for the free state of Missouri. It was a great gig. I loved it. And we launched the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit, which turned into Murphy versus Missouri. But you got to remember, so I think it's important to sort of go back in time. In 2021, 2022, really before Elon Musk had bought Twitter, before Jim Jordan was holding hearings, we filed this lawsuit. And it's interesting, Jen Psaki, you got to go back. This is COVID, forced masking, forced vaccinations. The real raw power of the federal government was on display. And Jen Psaki was standing there up at the podium saying, yeah, we're flagging this for Facebook. They need to take this down. They wanted to start a disinformation governance board. Remember Mary Poppins, who was singing, what was her name? But she's, singing about how great it is, and this disinformation must be taken down by the government. So you saw this, when we filed the lawsuit, we got discovery before the temporary restraining order that ultimately went to the Supreme Court. And what we found was shocking. We had an idea of what was happening, but could have never been prepared for what we found, which was high-level government officials working directly through a secret portal with the big tech companies at Facebook, at Twitter, saying, take this down. This is misinformation. You need to take this down. And them saying, okay, what else can we do? They were also threatening to take away Section 230 protections if they didn't do more censorship. So as this unfolded, it really, I think, showed to the world and to this country the real risk of these concentrations of power, with the federal government working directly with big tech giants to censor speech. And I think this is the fight. This is the fight long term for us. The Democrats, the liberals even, have ceded this ground, the high ground of defending your right to speak your mind. And so as conservatives, I think we should own this issue. It's the right thing to do. And clearly the American people, I think, watched all this the last 4 years, and they sent back President Trump to fix it.
That's exactly right. I think people need to understand the whole point of antitrust is to protect the free market, right? When you have these trillion-dollar monopolists using their market power to crush competition, you no longer have a functioning market. You no longer have a free market. And that's why antitrust laws that have been on the books are so critically important to break up this power. Because if you're a free market conservative like we both are, you should strongly support antitrust law enforcement. You are targeting the anti-competitive tumors on the free market, so you don't need industry-wide regulation. Facebook is calling for regulation. Of course they are, because they're a big company and they can afford to pay for the lawyers and the lobbyists and the PR people to navigate those regulations. Those are entry barriers to startup competitors. And I would say this, remember this about Google and YouTube. If Google competed against YouTube instead of acquired YouTube, there's no chance that Google would be censoring half of America based upon their political viewpoints. They would be competing, Google would be competing with YouTube for conservative users, not trying to censor them. And I think that's really important to remember.
And I think in Google in particular, like, there's been a lot of attention. I mean, thank God Elon Musk bought Twitter and X, and it really is a platform. It really is a platform. And, but Google is really the ultimate black box. That algorithm, like if you're a business or whatever, or you're a political candidate, there's a huge difference between you being on page 1 of the search and page 12 of the search, right? And nobody gets to see the wizard right now. Nobody gets to see it. So I think some of the litigation as relates to Google is really important to sort of bust that up so you have real competition.
That's right. There are two major antitrust lawsuits working their way through the courts right now, and Google's the worst of the worst. They're the worst actor. And one is on Google's search monopoly. When you go on Google and look for things online, that's their search monopoly. The bigger problem is Google has an online advertising monopoly, right? They use the money they make with their online advertising monopoly to fund their censorship. All their woke nonsense that they do is because they have this online advertising monopoly. And you're seeing lawsuits right now, again, started under Trump, to Biden's credit, continued under Biden. We need to finish the job with Trump's antitrust law enforcers, like Gail Slater at the Antitrust Division. Another problem you're seeing with these big tech platforms is something like NewsGuard, right? Where they rate news services in schools, like libraries and classrooms. And of course, they give conservative news organizations like Newsmax or Fox News or Breitbart, they give them lower grades. And so kids don't have access to conservative news sites. They get the liberal news sites like CNN and MSNBC, and that needs to end as well, because again, they're trying to control information and commerce in this country, and we just cannot let this happen. So,
well, and I think the other thing that's happening too, and we saw it, which is why, you know, it's such a great opportunity for us now with having President Trump in the White House, having a Republican House, having a Republican Senate, because we can actually put some structural safeguards in place too. For example, you know, Section 230 protections, what is that? Back in the 90s when the internet was sort of becoming a thing, what Congress said was, okay, you're going to be sort of immune from liability because you're a platform, right? People can go on there. As long as it's an open platform, you can't be sued for what somebody else says. And the idea was to have this democratization of information, right? What it didn't ever contemplate was that they would then be themselves sort of the censors, right? And so I think, you know, by way of legislation, you got to pick. You're either going to be an open platform or you're going to be a publisher who can get sued, like 60 Minutes ought to get sued for the nonsense that they did to President Trump in the interviews. So they got to pick a team. And also, if you're a bureaucrat and you work to censor Americans, you ought to be able to be sued individually by a citizen, so it doesn't take an attorney general to have to go do that. You, as an army of Americans, can sue the censors. That would change, I think that would really change the incentive structure, which would be really important. And I can't miss the opportunity to point out just how exciting, as Mike and I and all of you believe, the founders believed in this system of checks and balances where we have, power is spread out among the branches, you have federalism. The whole intent was so that no one branch or no one person could get so powerful to take your liberty away, right? That's the whole idea. The whole point is to protect individual liberty. They could have never contemplated the administrative state as it currently is right now, right? This army of bureaucrats in buildings, by the way, they don't even show up to work anymore. About 6% of people are actually in the offices here in Washington, D.C. on any given day. But they have immense power over your lives, right? Over your lives. They can take away your liberty in some cases. They could take away your livelihood. And so what President Trump is embarking on, and you see just the histrionics every day, the Democrats are losing their minds because of Doge and these efforts to strip away that power. And they should. They should, because the people of this country elected one person to run the executive branch. And he gets to make decisions on personnel and on policy. And you don't get to send millions of dollars to Guatemala for sex changes and think you're immune from having that money stripped away. That's what this fight is all about right now. So it's an exciting time.
It is an exciting time, and I will say this to the big tech platforms like Google and Facebook. Thank you for paying for Trump's inauguration. I think Mark Zuckerberg donated $1 million. We appreciate that. It was a fun party. But Mark Zuckerberg spent, what, $400 million chasing President Trump out of office in 2020. So $400 million versus $1 million. I think he has a lot of catching up to do. And I don't think that he's going to buy antitrust amnesty from the Trump 47 Justice Department or the Trump 47 Federal Trade Commission. We've had these antitrust laws on the books for 100 years, and to these trillion-dollar big tech platforms, nobody's above the law. And so justice is coming.
Yeah, and I think one other, with the time we have left, I just mentioned one other thing to kind of look out for. On the Judiciary Committee, I was telling Mike, I chair the Constitution Subcommittee. So we have jurisdiction over the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, so get ready. We're going to have some fun hearings and bring people in and hold people to account for trying to take away your right to speak your mind. So whoever's watching this, who engaged in the activity, stay tuned. But also, what's happening with Doge right now, and it was so smart to start with these, with USAID, right, where you had all of this money flowing to DEI programming in Burma and LGBTQIA plays in Europe and LGBTQ Sesame Street in Iraq. I mean, this is like totally insane, but that's where this money was going. But it was funneled effectively through these NGOs, right? The Biden administration was also using these NGOs to bring mass migration into this country, to break up our sovereignty as a country, and they were also using it to help flag things for their vast censorship enterprise. And so I think we're going to do some investigating on who these NGOs are. And if you want to know why the Democrats, if you want to know why they're objecting so much to this, there is a lot of corruption that's going to be exposed. So let's go.
I want to end this on this point. Senator Schmitt has been a warrior in the Senate for President Trump's cabinet picks and others, and Kash Patel was just confirmed today as our next FBI director. I remember when Kash was nominated, a lot of very smart people in Washington said his nomination was dead on arrival. Well, now it's Director Kash Patel, and I want to thank Senator Schmitt for all he does for President Trump and his nominees. This guy is a warrior, so thanks
for your work too. Thanks for your work too. Thank you. Yep. All right. God bless you guys.